Now, Professor Williams. I,
वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देवा सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा श्रीगणेशाय नमः। मंगलभावन मंगलहारी द्रवहूँ सो दशरथ अजीर बिहारी बंदहूँ बाल रूप सोई रामू सब सिद्धि सुलभ जपत जसु नामू।
Namaste. My name is Anuradha Goyal. I'm here to introduce Dr. Rupam Saran. Dr. Saran is a professor at Medgar Evers College, City University of New York, and a chair of the department in the Multicultural Early Childhood and Elementary Education Department. Dr. Saran's field of specialization is second generation Asian Indian students in Indian diaspora in North America, developing equity and inclusive STEM learning and teaching, mathematics education for minority immigrant children, implementing computational thinking and the concept of computer science in the elementary school classrooms, socio mathematical authority, teacher education and mathematics teachers, mathematics identity, preparing effective mathematics teachers, and educational attainment of second generation immigrant youth in urban India. She authored the book Model Minority Stereotype Understanding Asian Indian Youth in South Asian Diaspora. Dr. Saran has co authored the book Beyond Stereotypes Minority Children of Immigrants in Urban Schools with Dr. Rosalina Dias. Her forthcoming book is Deconstructing Media Representations of Teachers and Learners in the History of American Education. She has published many journal articles in the area of her research interests. Um, Her topic today, her lecture is titled In Between Indianness and Americanness Asian Indians and Their Children Model Minorities in North America. She will focus on migrant experiences of Indian diaspora in the United States. This study brings attention to highly motivated Asian Indians and their children, students who are, because of their cultural dispositions and outlooks on schooling, and those students who are more likely to underachieve. It highlights the assimilation of Asian Indian students in mainstream society and their understandings of Americanization, social inequality, diversity, and multiculturalism. Welcome, Dr. Saran.
फर्स्ट स्लाइड से जाइए। Okay, सही। नमस्ते। अभी आप लोगों ने मेरे बारे में कुछ सुना। खैर वो तो स्कॉलरली ये था। तो ये जो प्रेजेंटेशन है ये दिस इज बेस्ड ऑन माय एक्सपीरियंसेस इन न्यूयॉर्क in North America for 52 years. I am there for 52 years. I raised 3 girls um, and went to school and finished my schooling and the college and the PhD over there. So whatever I'm saying is based on my lived world and my experiences. So what I noticed, we Indians over there, we are in between Indianness and Americanness. So we try to maintain our Indian identity, and at the same time we try to cope and adapt American ways. Uh, it's a constant, I wouldn't say battle, but it's a constant process. And our children also are going through it, and they went through it. It's not moving. So I said I was in New York, and I'm still living in New York. So I show you some pictures, just a few. This is the first picture, and you see the people. They are a place called Queens, a middle class family. They are there. They are all immigrants. Second one is New York City. They are celebrating Diwali, and this is very recent. So instead of talking about culture and telling you a lot about how we maintain our culture, I'm showing you a few pictures. This is a festival from Bihar, Chhat, and it's being done for 4 or 5 years in New Jersey and many states in North America. So this tells you where we are and how we are trying to maintain our cultural heritage. There are no more pictures. So a very brief historical overview. The next speaker who is going to speak after me, he will be giving you in-depth uh, knowledge of Indian migration to the United States. So I'm just touching upon it. The migration from India started as early as 1800. The migration record shows that Indian immigrants migrated to the United States as early as 1850 to 1860. Indian immigrants continued to migrate to the United States because the labor recruiters from Hawaiian sugar plantations who recruited workers from India. The process ended in 1890 when Hawaiian recruiters stopped recruiting Indians, and by 1900, most of these Indians had left Hawaii and came to the mainland United States. The majority of Indian immigrants settled in farming as laborers, railroad construction, and mining, along with other Asian immigrants in the Northern California, Washington, Oregon. One special thing is about Indian migration from Indian subcontinent to United States is that it's a voluntary immigration. They migrated on their will. They were not forced to go to United States. They wanted to go there to have a better life. It's after 1800, during 1900. And because their voluntary immigration, their experiences were different than other countries like South Africa, Caribbean countries. They went there to be a successful immigrant, to have a much better life from India. So their experiences are different. Immigration in early 1900 and onward. Most of the Indians who left their country and decided to migrate had one common aim of exploring educational and occupational or professional opportunities that was available in the United States and were not available in India. Many came to the United States as the dependents of professional migrants. The immigration pattern was influenced by the Immigration Act and policies. Migration in United States can be categorized in six basic categories. The immigrants who migrated during the midst of late 1800, the independence of India, the post-independence before 1965, students' migration to the United States, the migration of Indian population after the 1965 Immigration Act, the immigrants who migrated between 1980 and 1990 on the basis of kinship. I mean, they were related to these professionals who immigrated before them. And the current student population who migrated during the 1980 and continued to arrive to the US after tragedy of 9/11 for higher education. And the second generation Indian youth who are attending American high schools and colleges, or young professionals who are born and brought up in America. As I said before, you will be hearing a lot about migration history from another speaker. My focus is more on second generation who are born and brought up there or who went there with their parents. So the second generations are called second generation, and the children who went there at the age of 5 or little over to the United States with their parents are called 1.5 generation. So I'm giving you a little data that shows you Indian American immigrants' year of arrival by citizenship status. So as you see, and this data is taken from Pew Research Center. That's very recent, 2022 or 2023. See, the during 2000, the migration percentage is very high. So as you saw the data, and after that, I will be talking about their educational attainment. The data suggests that the vast majority of Indian immigrant population in the United States were already highly educated prior to arriving in the country. In all, 52% of Indians in America completed their education in the United States. What does it mean they completed their education? If they came to United States with bachelor's, they did their master's, they did their PhD, or they went to professional schools. If they came there completing engineering in India, they did another engineering, they did master's or any other professional degree. They attained any other professional degree. 42% arrived in the United States with an undergraduate degree, and another 38% had completed a graduate or professional degree before their arrival. 11% finished high school elsewhere, while only 8% had less than a high school education when they migrated there. So the people who are in this 8% category, most of them are, related to somebody who migrated much earlier to them, and they became professionals or they established themselves professionally and economically. here is the data, what I was talking about. You can see this is also very recent data, Pew Research Center. And I'm not going to talk about percentage much here, but you can see I'm giving you a second to look at it. Educational attainment of Indians in the United States. So I'm moving on to another slide. Okay, so my study is about belongingness and identity. So I'm talking about assimilation and adaptation, survival of Indian culture in the United States. You saw a glimpse of in my earlier slides what is happening now. You know, where we are, they are celebrating Diwali now, they are celebrating Chhat. But like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was not visible. Diwali is visible. Uh, Students are getting holidays on the day of Diwali. But when I was doing my research in 2002, in many schools, I went to do my research, on the day of Diwali. This Indian student will say, "Today is Diwali, today is Diwali." But there was no recognition of Diwali from the principal or the Board of Education. But now they get holidays on Diwali. So it is what Indian immigrants talk about their assimilation and adaptation. 83% of foreign born Indian Americans claim being Indian is either very or somewhat important to their identity. They say we are Indians, but at the same time we are American also. Uh, Compared to 70% of US born Indian Americans. The 70% of US born Indian Americans, like our children, if you ask them who you are, where you come from, they will say, my parents are from India, but I am American or I am born here. The difference are most pronounced among those who say being Indian is very important to them. On the other hand, other end of the spectrum, 30% of Indian Americans born in the United States answer that being Indian is either somewhat or very unimportant to them to their identity. A response given by just 17% of foreign-born Indian Americans. So this data is coming from a survey. So the people I'm talking about, they are described or they are called as new immigrants, new Indian immigrants. Uh, they are ascribed model minority status. This is a stereotyping, like everybody is in one category because we do very well professionally, economically. American society, they ascribe this status. We don't say that we are model minority, but they say they are model minority compared to other minorities. We face high expectations. Uh, there are many success stories that overshadow academic failure and intra-group diversity. You saw my books, there were two books. One was Navigating Modern Minority Status in Indian Diaspora, and second was Beyond Stereotype. There is a population who are not being successful, very small percentage, but their needs, their um, failure, I would say failure, is overshadowed by all these success stories. So it works against them. When you go to school, uh, there are 25 children in one classroom, and there are 5 or 6 or 7 Indians, Indian children. One is not doing well, but their needs are overlooked on the basis that all Indian children do very well. Compared to other races, if they are not doing well, they are given help, they are provided resources because their needs are acknowledged. our needs are often overshadowed by the success story. How important it's for Indian immigrants and their children is being Indian. So overall, 41% of respondents rate it as very important, and another 37% rate it as somewhat important. Being Indian is not important, but majority of them say it's important. It's their identity. They come from India. They practice cultural practices that are Indian, but 37% they say it's not important. Most of the Indian Americans place a high value on their Indianness. Around 22% state that their Indian identity is either somewhat or very important. The importance of a respondent Indian identity might vary by their place of birth. For instance, it is possible that Indian Americans born in the United States would place less emphasis on their Indianness than their counterpart who immigrated. As I talked to you, like my children or my generation uh, immigrants' children, they say, my parents are from India, but I'm from here. So their point of reference is America. My point of reference is India. Um, that's very important. When we talk about Indian diaspora in North America, second generation, they are doing very well. They are the highest paid, only next to the whites in the United States. About 3 months ago, I was in a conference like this, and somebody from audience, he stood up. He said, "No, your children, second generation Indians, are the highest paid in the United States." So I just looked at the data, and I was talking just like that. They are the second highest paid. They are very successful. They are doing very well in American society. They are going in politics. They are going in all as challenging fields, but their point of reference in America because they are born either in America or they came to America with their parents when they were very young. So that's the Indianness and their belongingness. They belong to America, although their roots are in India. Their parents are from. I talked about this slide before, so I was talking about stereotyping, right? In the and acculturation process. Individuals either take advantage of the positive stereotyping or refute their stereotyped ethnic image and move to downward mobility. This is what I'm talking about beyond stereotype. There are cases when the parents are very successful, whole family is very successful, but one their children, one child from the family is moving to downward mobility. There are many factors. There are experiences. So that's I would say, we pay the price of migration when we go there. And because of the modern minority status, we do not address it. So what are the social realities? First generation Asian Indians, we always feel we are foreigners. Asians hold third place sense of otherness. We in the mainstream society, we always feel we are other. This notion of forever foreigners. Uh, just 2 months ago, I had a conference organized on this forever foreigner concept. No matter how long we live there, mainstream, they look at us foreigners. It happened with me. I was there for 30 years, and somebody from Caribbean island, she was there maybe 8 or 10 years, only 10 years, and I was talking about something, my experience said this is not fair, that is not fair. She said, you know what your problem is, that you foreigners are not united. I'm saying, who is the foreigner here? I'm here for 35 years, 30 years, and you are here, but I'm seen as a foreigner. So most of the time, many times, and there is a lot written about it, we are called honorary white. We are brown, right? But like white population, we are very successful. So honorary white or forever foreigners. We experience it all the time. So our immigrant identity is always defined through lenses of race, racism, and ethnicity. We are constantly living in two worlds. First generation and the second generation both. Constantly experiencing process of becoming American. No matter how American we become, but this process is constantly going on. Living in between cultures. Like me, I said, I'm talking based on my experiences. When I go to my own people, I'm in my ethnic dress, but in professional world, I'm competing with Americans. I just like that. So what is this? It's in between culture. It's always going on. Experiencing differentiation and otherness. I may be very successful. Huh? I am no less than any white person or any American person. But same time I experience others. I'm other. I'm not one of them. And with this process, we created unique identity. So mediating life world factors and identity formation. How do we form our identity? There are two kinds of identity, right? How you identify yourself, how I identify myself, how others identify me. Huh? For others, once I got a note from my college saying sisters of color. And I'm brown, right? Among whites and blacks. But I never looked myself as colored person. But that's how they identified me. It was positive letter, they were inviting me for something. So sisters of color. So that's the part of identity, how I'm identified and how I identify myself. Triple quandary. We are living, it's like three quandaries we are living. We are in between. We are taking resources from our family, our friends. That's first quandary. Second, outside, my friends, my relationship. And third, what is the third, the mainstream culture. So how I'm perceived by mainstream culture. That's one factor that helps us establish our identity and how others perceive us. Then habitus, capital, and cultural values. Cultural values are there. Habitus is Pierre Bourdieu's concept. We are product of our habitus, our life work. So being there as an immigrant, migrant woman, my habitus is what? My cultural values, my family values, and the American culture. So I belong to two places, India and America. And of course, modern minority is in the center. Hegemonic conditions. We Indians, we try to be quiet. Not only Indians, Asians, quiet, calm. We don't raise our voices much. So that's also part of our identity. And for our children, the parental immigrant status. How they are placed there, what is their social status, what is their immigrant status, migration status. Here I write identity construction, lived experiences at workplace and in school and colleges. We are negotiating our positive experiences. Same time, we negotiate negative experiences and constantly going through contradictions, conflict, and complexities of the society we migrated to. How I am going to deal with that? That's a constant process, and we all go through it. Either we acknowledge it or not. Somebody can say, "No, I had no problem." That's fine. But when you really analyze it, go deep into that, there were negative experiences, there were problems. Maybe you did not recognize it. One of my student, I was talking to him, and he said, "You know what, Dr. Saran, my parents, they did not recognize the negative experiences. They came to this country, they had good, they earned well, they lived well, and they closed their eyes. But I can identify that." And I was thinking about it, and I said, "Yeah, he's right. He's right. He or she looks at it when they're growing up. Huh? They they are there. They didn't go there from different country, so their experiences are different." So I touched upon it just a little bit. Constructing identity is about our children, second generation. In the school, in the college, they have constant peer pressure. They have to uh, balance their life. Home life is very different from the life outside their home. They have to deal with oppositional forces. They are outside in the college. Their peers are telling them, "Let's go to the club." And at the home, mom and dad are saying, "No, this is not good." Uh, they're constantly experiencing oppositional forces. Sometimes they feel cultural isolation. Sometimes parents are very protective of their children. They do not want them to mingle in American society. So they feel cultural isolation and cultural discontinuity. It's hard to continue with their cultural heritage in mainstream American society. So they experience this also. And because of the time constraint, I'm not going deep into all this terminology. I'm just explaining it in nuance. Uh, Under shadow of success story, pressure, we all experience pressure and tension, overt and covert prejudice. Maybe you cannot read the prejudice, but it's there. Internalization of high expectations. I always experience it. I did my college over there, BA, MA, and PhD. And constantly I heard from professors, "Oh, I expected more from you." In one of my course, I got 98 out of 100. Okay. And just because of the language barrier, one question I did, and he said, "What happened to you?" I said, "What? What did I do wrong?" I thought you will breeze through and you will get 100 in 100. I said, oh, excuse me. Same with PhD, and master's program constantly. They will say, oh, you wrote such a big research paper. It took me so long to read it. But that's what I expect from you. I said, oh, if I wrote less, then you would have given me lower, point. So we all internalize these high expectations. Sense of obligation for the parents and for our society also. Like, second generation, they say they have to do well because they owe this to their parents. They migrated here for them. They hear it all the time. Expression of ethnicity. Should I express my ethnicity or not? To my peers, to the mainstream society, and self marginalization. Parents are constantly telling their children, you have to go become a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. They are hearing it all the time. So if they are interested in sports or in field of art, they don't go in those areas much. Now things are changing. It has changed a lot, but it's still there. Negotiation of collective identity in a school, college context, staying away, maintaining social distance. What does it mean, maintaining social distance? We can be very friendly with the mainstream society, but there is a thin line, a very thin line that keeps us away. We cannot be one of them. Negotiate notion of good and bad Americanization. You are Americanized, but good Americanization is you are successful, you are professional, you fulfilled American dream, own a car, own a house, that life. And bad Americanization, you can speak English very well, you can dress up just like an American, but you are on the downward mobility or you do not meet that bar. Survival, living up to academic standards. I just talked about to you in last previous slide. Survival techniques, silence and accommodation. We all do it. We bear discrimination and prejudice quietly. If somebody from another country, they may raise their voices, they may fight, but we Indian immigrants, we try to be quiet, try to be silent, and bear it. Okay, so this is about second generation. Three categories: American identified, second generation Indians. There are few who identify themselves as Americans, nothing to do with Indianness, and they'll say I'm an American. American Indian or Indian American, they are in between. They balance their Indianness and they balance their Americanness also, Indian or Desi. American identified, distance from their ethnicity and downplay Indianness, acting white or try to fit in the mainstream society. They often they show oppositional behavior to fit in. Identification with Afro-American and hip-hop culture, signs of downward mobility. American Indians or Indian American identify with home culture, take pride in their heritage, meet modern minority standards, are on upward mobility, and they have a balanced outlook. Indian or Desi, children of relatively newer immigrants, very strong association with Indian culture, depend on parental social network, remain isolated in social network of school, often lower level of English language proficiency. Not always. All right. So I talked about identity and belongingness. Identity, agency, and actions are not limited to the experience of the individual of learning, success, or failure. Rather, they include the narrative of the social, historical, and cultural context. In other words, focusing only on the experience without considering learners' social, cultural, and historical perspectives is limited and limiting. I was talking about three types of second generation. I have three daughters, all fit in. One identifies with American culture more. Second one is balance, and third one is more towards this year. She identifies more with Indianness. Thank you for listening to me. And if you have any question, okay. So he's yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for that brilliant introduction to the model minority of America. I really like the term model minority. Our next speaker is Professor Ashutosh Kumar, who is the Professor of History at Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. Currently, he is Fulbright-Nehru Academic and Professional Excellence Fellow at Harvard University, USA. His publications include Coolies of the Empire, Indentured Indians in the Sugar Colonies, 1830 to 1920, Indian Soldiers in the First World War, Revisiting a Global Conflict, 1914 to 1918, edited with Claude Markowitz, Warfare and Society in British India, 1757 to 1947, edited with Kaushik Roy, and Girmitias and Global Indian Diaspora, Origins, Memories and Identities. He's working on his next book, broadly entitled Huli Nama, Lost Voices of Indentured Indians. His topic today would be Girmitia Indian Diaspora in the Old Sugar Colonies of European Empires and the Markets of the Identity, such as religious, cultural performances, rites and rituals, food, and gastronomy. Welcome, Professor Ashutosh Kumar.
Thank you. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Gigi, we can hear you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor Indrani Pandita, for inviting me to this introductory course on Indian diaspora. Since I am an expert of Indian indentured diaspora, I'll focus centrally on this theme, the indentured diaspora. Well, as we all know that after the evolution of slavery by the British Parliament by an act in 1833, a new system was devised to obtain labor for the former slave colonies. Right. So in 1833, what we find that the British Empire abolished the slavery, and that's how a paucity of labor all across the British colonies was revealed actually. So to cope up with this paucity of labor, because the former slaves were, not interested in working on the plantations, they were looking for different laborers. So in that way, British Parliament actually devised another policy, a new system. A new policy which was known as indenture system, right? So under that system, it was a contract-based system in which indentured laborers had to sign a contract for 5 years, and in the contract, the hours, wages, food, accommodation, and medical facilities, all these things were mentioned in the contract form. It is interesting to know that the very first form which they signed was in Bengali, because the first batch who went to Mauritius, And Mauritius was the first colony where Indian indentured laborers first went. So that very first form was written in Bengali. In my book, Coolies of the Empire, I have given that form, and those who are interested to look deeper, they can see that form in my book, right? So what we find that the under this indenture system, the immigration started from 1834, and the first batch under indenture contract went in August 1834 with with 39 laborers to Mauritius, right? So from August 1834 to until the end of the indenture, that is by the 1st January of 1920, although it was not announced, but the system was ended in 1917. More than 1.3 million laborers signed the contract and reached to the various European sugar colonies such as Mauritius, British Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, Suriname, Natal, Reunion, Fiji, around 20 countries and around 20 colonies where they went. Now, when they went, definitely, only what our record shows that only 30% laborers returned back to their homeland, India, and all 70% laborers stay back. It means that they form a large, a big Indian diaspora, right, in those colonies, and definitely they are even today. And we know that how, Mauritius, Fiji, Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname, that the Indians are even in the power, in the political power. Now, if you look to the question of identity and belongingness, it start with their the identity question start with the with the very beginning of the indenture system. And what we find that they found two identities until now. The first identity was very much associated with the plantation, that I called it plantation identity. And the second form of identity was very much associated with political identity. The second identity was the political, and the first identity was the plantation identity. Now, if you look to the first kind of the identity, which was the plantation identity, then you find that the first batch who went to Mauritius, and since Mauritius was a French colony and French was prevalent there, so they called themselves engagé. It came from engagement, because that contract was kind of engagement between Indian laborers and the planters, and that's how broadly in Mauritius they called themselves engagé. That is in from engagement. What we find that in some other colonies like Suriname, they called themselves as contraki, and that come from contract, because the terminology, it was also a contract between laborer and planters, and that's how they called themselves contraki. And the third kind of identity emerged when they started going to Fiji, and that was known as girmitia. And now everybody calls themselves girmitia, because this is a very acceptable terms for them. And everywhere now these indentured diaspora is identify themselves as girmitia. But definitely it started with Fiji. So what we find that during plantation time, the three important identities emerge among Indian laborers. Will not call until now, until that period as diaspora, but among the laborers, the first was Angase, that was very much in Mauritius, which was the first colony. And Mauritius also obtained the largest volume of indentured laborers, around half million, around 5 lakh people migrated to Mauritius, right? And the second identity came as Kontraki. Basically, that identity was in Suriname, because when the indenture started in Suriname, it was called it was a kind in the legal terminology, it was a contract. For the Mauritius, it was engagement. For Suriname, it became contract. And what we find that when it started for Fiji, now it was known as agreement. So from agreement, the grimit came, from contract, the contracti came, and from angaze. Uh, so all these terminologies came during the indenture period, when the system was introduced and the laborers were going or traveling or transported to the various colonies. Now, apart from that, during the plantation period, another kind of identity also emerged. In most of the writing, it was called the imperial identity, but that was, I mean, very much Indian identity, I believe, and that identity was quote unquote coolie identity. And this identity is very problematic nowadays and very controversial. No any descendant of indentured laborers associate themselves with this identity nowadays. Professor Indrani knows that if somebody will take the word, I mean, coolie, it's feel really bad actually in those countries, even in Caribbeans or in Pacific or in Indian Ocean colonies like Natal or Mauritius. But definitely it was another identity, and the important thing was that the coolie identity was everywhere for each colony. The Ngaze, Kontraki, and Girmitia was associated with the particular colony, but the coolie identity emerged as the indentured identity. Everywhere they were known as coolies, because in the imperial documentations they were called as coolie, identify as coolies, and they themselves even called that I'm coolie from here and there, right? Uh, so that was another. And this word has been in among the academia and the social scientists, or among the other kind of the writers. Nowadays, even it has emerged as a the term which is very debatable. Like if you look to the book Coolie Women by Gayatri Bahadur, she has also discussed that the how this C, I mean, they don't call coolie, rather they only use the first word, I mean, first alphabet of the coolie C word, right? So even in my book Coolies of the Empire, I've discussed that the how the word coolie is very problematic for those who lived in the diaspora, indentured diaspora countries, right? Now, apart from these four kind of the identity, Angaze, Kontraki, Girmitia, and Coolie, indentured laborers themselves came up with some other form of the identity, and that was much prevalent in Fiji, and later it also spread to Caribbean countries, and that was Jahazi identity, right? So how this Jahazi identity came? Jahazi identity was among the indentured laborers. The other all identity, the four identity which I discussed, this was in relation with the other community in the colonies. But the Jahazi identity was among the indentured laborers identity, among the indentured laborers. For instance, those people who came in a one ship, they called themselves either Jahaji Bhai or Jahaji Behan. So to identify with the other Jahaji Bhai, they always call, we are of certain, I mean, we are Jahaji Bhais because we came in a same ship, right? And that relationship, became part of their kind of a blood relationship. So for instance, in the marriages, they always prefer that they will not marry with the any person, anyone who is my Jahazi Bhai or Jahazi Bahan, right? So that was very important. Like the blood relation, they consider themselves as a blood relationship. So among, basically this was in Fiji. This was basically, it was in Fiji, but in later period, what we find that it was also among the Caribbean one, because in most of the writing they called themselves Jahazi. I don't know whether this is the Jahazi identity is whether associated with Caribbean, or I feel it is not associated with the Caribbean. It is only and only associated. But very recently, a book came by the title of the book was Jahazins, by one of the Caribbean author. She lives in Delhi. So sea content that it was also there in Caribbean. It's okay, but I believe that the Jahaji identity was also among the Fiji Indians. Now this was the plantation identity, broadly I called, because these identities were emerged from the plantation economy, right, during the indenture period, and it ran until the indenture period. Now in post indenture period, and in the in the event of decolonization in the colonies, when they get independence, another form of identity emerged, and that was political identity. And under that identity, indenture Indians were identified as Indo-Guyanese, if somebody is in Guyana, Indo-Trinidadian, Indo-Surinamese, or Indo-Fijian. Sometimes people, call it Fiji Indians or Fiji, Suriname Indians, something like. But these broadly, this identity came in the after the in the post indenture period, as well as after decolonization of those colonies, when they get independence and they were trying to make their own. They became a free country. So they were now known as Indo-Guyanese, Indo-Trinidadian, Indo-Suriname, or Indo-Fijian. So this identity came once they settled down in the colony, and now they that those colonies got independence. Now if you look to these were the identities which were directly associated with the plantation as well as the independence of the country. Now if you look to the Indian identity, there were another forms of identity as well, and that is very much associated with belongingness, the second aspect which we have to cover in that. And that is associated with the socio-cultural and religious practices, and that is more important nowadays. Although the previous all four or five identities are also very important, but there was another identity which is very much or directly associated with the belongingness, right? And since they were from India, so definitely their identity will be part of the Indian religious socio-cultural practices. So in that way, the two important identities emerged, and that was a Hindu identity and Muslim, out of the Indian belongingness, right? The Hindu and the Muslim. And we will find that in every aspect of their socio-cultural life, these identities are socio-cultural performances, these identities were there. uh, Now if you look to the formation of culture, or the Hindu practices or the Muslim practices in India, it was very much associated with agriculture. The culture, that's what I called, the culture in India is very much associated with agriculture, right? Then how on the plantations colony, or in the plantation colony, how these cultures survived, right? Whether these agricultural practices were there in the colonies, or without without such agricultural practices, there these cultural identities or cultural performance emerged. This is a very important question to know or to understand, because in India, whatever the festival, whatever the cultural performances we do, it is very much associated with agriculture. And through agriculture, we have all kind of the, even the religious or other form of the cultural practices. So agriculture is always important in formation of cultural identity in India, or the cultural practices in India. That is why I send you a chapter of my book that is called Culture and Agriculture Between Two Worlds. Because to understand the culture of India, you need to understand the agricultural practices. So for instance, if you will say that, you cannot celebrate Holi anytime. You cannot celebrate Ram Navami anytime. You cannot celebrate even marriages anytime. We have a defined certain norms, and that is very much associated with the agricultural calendar, right? So what we call that the culture is lived and reproduced in communities, but it is very much related to place and exigencies of the work. The place is very important because that's how the culture emerged, right? So what we find that in India, the quotidian culture of Indian peasant life have been based on agriculture. Various ceremonies, festivals, rites, rituals related to birth, post-birth, marriage, or the families, or the deities worship. It is very, very much deeply inherent in the agricultural practices. Now, those people whose culture is very much based in the agriculture went somewhere went somewhere where there was only one kind of agricultural practices, that was sugarcane plantation, right? Here in India, we had multi crop production, means we produce so many kinds of the crop, and that the culture is very much associated with all those crops, right? There in the sugar colonies, they had to only produce agriculture. Then how these multi-crop cultures, existed or survived there? That is the real question to understand the formation of Indian culture outside India, especially among the Indian indentured diaspora. And in that way, what we find that, for instance, uh, if you and what I argue that even if in the colony, since even if in the colony there was only monoculture, mono crop production, definitely they tried to opt the Indian culture. And how it happened? So it happened in many ways, right? So for instance, here, when somebody gets married, then definitely we look to the nakshatra, and we look to the you know uh, various kind of the lunar calendrical things, that whether it is not karmas or it is karmas and all it, and then these things are very much associated with the agricultural practices. It is one cannot get married any time, although nowadays one can do, but in the peasant calendar one cannot do. But in the indenture period, when they went to the colonies, it was not possible for them to follow these practices. Initially, when there was no settled Indian society on the plantations, because they were just migrant laborer, they had no any settlements. So what was happening, that during the indenture period, their marriages were not based on the agricultural rites or the agricultural practices through which here the marriage ceremony were happening in India. So what we find that there on the plantations, they had a concept of marit, or the marriage, and that is known as the registered marriage. On the colonies, only those marriages were valid which were registered in the court, nowadays known as the court marriages everywhere. That practice was there on the plantations. So only those kind of marriages were allowed which were performed in the court by signing by the both parties, male and female. Uh, but it does not mean that over a period of time it didn't change. Totaram Sanade or many indenture laborers who went to who has produced or written extensively on the indenture system, although they worked under the indenture, they have indicated so many things which were showing that even if the in the plantation colonies, the only marit, I think you guys should read a very good chapter written by Professor Brizlal, and that chapter is known as marit. It is in a book called Bittersweet, right? And that chapter is very interesting to understand the marit identity and what was marit for the indentured laborers on the plantation. So what we find that even if those calendrical or the lunar and solar calendrical cycles were not there on the plantations, and the only marriage system was very much prevalent, and it was accepted by the plantation regime or the colonial government in the plantation colonies. We had ample evidences of marriage performances in Indian ways. Totaram Sanadya in Fiji में मेरे 21 वर्ष, that's a very fascinating, very nice book. As well as in Bhutlen ki Katha, he discusses about the marriage performances on the in Fiji, and definitely he pity on the the married idea. But what he is saying that what you find that the apart from the marriage, there was definitely a marriage ceremony which was in a way that we did in India. So that was also there. Apart from that, if you look to the other practices like in India, our religious performances are very much based again on the agricultural calendar. Like Holi, when we cut the agriculture at the, I mean, and when the new year begin, at that time we celebrate Holi. There we have ample evidence, definitely during even in under the plantation regime, the celebration of Holi were there. Uh, the very interesting thing was that the colonial government only given 3 or 4 holidays on the plantations, and the Holi was one of that. For the holy day, for the holy performances, plantation given a chutti holiday for the celebration of Holi. So that was very interesting. And since the only thing is that even if there was no any kind of the cultural ceremony or the coming of the new year on the plantation, but they were celebrating Holi as they celebrated here in India. So even if the agricultural practices which they had here in India, it was not there. The people always try to up their Indian culture there, and that's how their identity associated with the Hindu identity, especially associated with the celebration of Hindu festivals like Aktis, Nag Panchami, Raksha Bandhan, Holi, Diwali, and these festivals were very much prevalent even during the plantation time, even during the indentureship period. And once they got decolonized and they formed their own country, definitely they taken it in a more Indian way, right? Uh, Apart from that, if you look to the religious performances, such as among the Muslims, the Tazia, the Hose festival was very much prevalent all across the colonies. Everywhere they celebrated the Hose that was known as Tazia. And on the plantations, there are lots of scholarship developed on the Tazia and how it became a site for contestation between Indians and the colonial officials, because Indians, I mean, either Hindu or Muslim, they both participated in Tazia celebration, just like in India. I mean, although it was a Muslim festival, Muslim religious performance, but definitely Hindu population also broadly participated in that. And on the plantations, what many scholars have argued that the festive time, or especially the Tajia time, became one of the site of contestation between the plantation authority as well as the Indian indentured laborers, because there was a chances of clash between both during the procession, and so. But what is important here is that that celebration was going on, and colonial plantation regime also provided a holiday for the Tajia celebration, Tajia commemoration, or the Tajia festival. So I mean, in the and the Muslim identity also emerged around that, around the Muslim festivals, around the celebration of the Muslim religious festivals or the practices. Apart from that, and the Hindu and Muslim identity associated with the cultural performance were even divided into two separate kind of the performances. That was one, the bigger or larger one, like Holi, Diwali, or Nag Panchami, or so. Apart from that, you will find that the local deities performances, or the pujas, or the worshipping, like local deities like D, in Banaras, even in the university itself, there is a D Baba and Akela Baba. They were the D. And D culture, the village gods culture is very much prevalent in North India. And everywhere in the colonies, these people perform or worship their local deities. They found their D in their villages, wherever they settled down, or made their settlements. So that was also significant to understand how on the plantation the Hindu or the Indian cultural identity emerged, or Indianness or belongingness emerged, right? That was very much associated with the bigger as well as the smaller rites and rituals and the socio-cultural performances. uh, Apart from that, what we find that among the religious practices, there were many sects also emerging all colonies, and that was also very much associated with the Indian sects, like in Fiji. Totaram Sanade has described, if you go through the Totaram Sanade's book, he is describing that the Kabir Panthis, Sanatanis, Arya Samajis, so these apart from a larger broader Hindu identity, there were even the minute identities or the smaller identities in terms of sects, right? So in all colonies, what we find that these sects were very important. And from the even during the indenture period, people were following these sects. So we find that the Kabir Panthis were very important in Fiji, along with the Sanatanis and Arya Samajis. Although Sanatanis and Arya Samajis, two sects of Indian Hindu religion, were much prevalent all across the colonies, but the smaller sects were very also important. Especially when we go through the writings of Totaram Sanadia, who was an indentured laborer in Fiji, he is writing about such identities, such religious practices, and the akhadas. Apart from that, he's also mentioning about lots of the akhadas, the cultural practice which we have in North India. So that was also associated with, that was also there in the plantation colonies. Now, if you look to these were the broadly religio-cultural social identities, and which were, although in northern India, these identities emerged through the agricultural practices, but on the plantation colonies, since even if there was no any multi-crop or the agriculture, and they had only sugarcane production, and the rations and many things were directly obtained from the plantations and the officials, they try to continue with their Indian practices there, right? Although it was very difficult for them to sustain. I sent another very important article, a link which was on the flora, fauna, and medical thing. What we find that on the plantation, even in terms of medical health care, they try to opt Indian medical system like Ayurveda. So, if you look to the details in that article, which I sent to all of you to read, that they preferred. Although on the plantations, the modern medical system, modern medical hospitals were available, but in most of the time they preferred the Indian way of treating disease. Apart from that, they also opted the Indian way of even childbirthing. So our data says that during the plantation time, even there was a hospital for child birthing. Most of the people prefer birthing at home through dai, or the so-called quote unquote chamain, which we called. Although it's a very derogatory terminology nowadays, quote unquote. But these midwives, these practices were very much prevalent. If you look to the
Can we
data,
wrap up now for the
yeah.
question and
I'm
answer?
just ending in 2-3 minutes. Yeah.
Take a few
So what
minutes
we
to wrap.
find that, yeah, yeah. So what we find that if you look to their cultural performances, that was very much very much associated with their identities as well as the belongingness. Apart from that, if you look to their music, or their other form of the cultural performances, like in Suriname or in Fiji, or in even Mauritius, the Videsiya culture is very much prevalent, and that was, the early 19th century, UP Bihar, I mean, Bihari or Bengali culture. Bhikari Thakur, performed the Videshia play, and that form of play is very much prevalent in the colonies, in which you will find the song which, in which you will find that the Girmitia people were remembering their homeland. And on that basis, you will find that one Babu Raghuveer Sahai, wrote a very nice Purvi that you all have heard, that the Sundara Subhumi Bhaiya Bharata ke Desavase, Mora Prana Base hi Makhohare Batohiya. So that this Batohiya poem came out of that imagination or belongingness among the indentured Indian diaspora in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, or in the Indian Ocean colonies, right? So in their socio-cultural performances, we always find that their identity and belongingness were intact there in the colonies. Okay, then, I think I should stop here, and I'll take the questions if they would have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ashutosh Kumar, and also Professor Saran. We are open for question now to both speakers. Any online?
Yeah.
And while we are waiting for the online question, with regards to the marriages in colonies, our system of marriage was not recognized. But people
Right.
still conducted the marriages. They still had it, and they would officially register the marriage. You had to be, otherwise, the marriage is not recognized by the legal system of the country. And to protect the rights of women and children and so on, you had to make sure that you were legally, married. So we have both going on, and now, of course, these marriages, both Hindu and Muslim marriages, are recognized. So I can conduct a fully Hindu marriage and sign the register also as a legal document. So that has changed. I'm sure you'd be happy to know that. Any questions while I'm
Exactly.
waiting for questions?
And also, Indrani, if you look to the Gandhian Satyagraha movement in South Africa, the very important issue was the Indian marriage. So Gandhi made this a big issue. And when the Satyagraha was ended, although the colonial government of Natal didn't accept all these demands, but the marriage demand was fulfilled by the government. So now after that, Indians were able to, marry in their own ways. Yeah.
Any questions? So while you're waiting, I have one for Professor Saran. In terms, when you spoke of one in the family being downward mobility, and I immediately thought of the black sheep in the family. Everybody, we talk of all families, whether we are immigrants or not, that there is a black sheep in the family. How would you relate both? Yes.
Yeah, it's there, black sheep in the family. Often it happens because it goes unnoticed, and parents also do not pay much attention, and school also. A child is not meeting the standard just on the basis that, oh, child is maybe shy, maybe doesn't like to speak up. So that child is not being helped.
And there is a good infrastructure in schools and in the American society also that can help the children, okay, these individuals. But often it's not noticed, parents do not acknowledge, and sometimes it's the individual intrinsic behavior also, there are one example, the two children in the family, brother and sister. Sister went to law school, studied quietly, did everything. And the brother or the son, he came under the peer pressure. He liked to hang on the streets, he liked to smoke, he get into all these things. And it's a oppositional behavior. If parents are saying something, I'm not going to listen to it. So what? My sister is going to be a lawyer. I will also survive. And the other thing is over there, they get, if you are employed, it's fine. If you are unemployed, you get unemployment. So you get into that rut. You take some job, you are employed for 6 months, you quit or you are fired, you will get some money. So that's there. But that percentage is very low and it's growing. It's growing. And that's why the researchers like us, or, that should be pointed out. And we immigrants, the first generation, we have to acknowledge it. Often parents, they whitewash it. They will not talk about it. If a child in the family, it's a different situation, has some learning disability, or some other kind of disability. There are many cases, I know, parents don't acknowledge it. And the child is neglected, the individual is neglected. There is so much resources in the society, in American society. If you try to take advantage, your child or your son or daughter will be never placed. I hope I answered the question.
Yes. Is there a particular age at which identity becomes more in the forefront of development?
Okay, so that's a very good question. When they are in elementary school, it's okay. Fourth grade, fifth grade, first grade, it's fine. As they are in adolescent, they go to middle school or high school. That's the time they are more on the left. And the ones who are American identified, they will try to do many things which makes them look more American. And there are two terms, okay? It's like they say Twinkies. What's Twinkie? You look colored or yellow from outside, and inside you are white. So, you try to act white outwardly also.
Oreo.
Yeah, or Oreo. you know. So in the school, it's more, you see it more. But once they go to college, good number of them, many of them, they try to go back to their heritage or culture, and their own cultural identity gets more prevalent. They start thinking about it. Like in many colleges, students are celebrating Holi, Diwali. I mean, in their own way, but they are acknowledging it, they are doing it. But in adolescent and high school, I mean, in my research, is not, they will, whoever wants to show oppositional behavior, it's more prevalent at that stage. And in college, a lot of them, they go for Indian food, and maybe in high school or middle school, they say, oh, I don't like Indian food. I like this American food, blah, blah, blah. But once they are in college, most of them, yeah, I'm not going to touch religious identity, but their cultural identity, their racial identity comes in play more. And now I see recently for like few years, the religious identity is also coming in.
Because I find like we in the Caribbean, we are 6th and 7th generation.
Yeah.
And still very conscious Indianness, whereas in America, I see your second generation have lost quite a lot. Can you say some reasons for that?
The reason might be because in Caribbean countries were very small, and when people migrated there from India, and then again also I didn't talk much about that voluntary immigration or involuntary immigration. I mean, migrated and they went there on sugar plantation. You heard about it, and many other places. The French, they came and they took Indians there. Intended workers, South Africa and things. But here people came on their will. More recent, they are more educated, professional, and America is a big diverse country. There's a lot to choose from. So that might be one reason. I mean, that's what I think. There might be other reasons. Diversity in America.
Thank you very much, Professor. We have one last question and some comments. We got thank you for both the sessions, as usual, very informative. Dhanyawad, very nice and interesting lectures. And this question is directed to Professor Ashutosh.
Yes.
Good evening, sir. Gurmit people made modern Fiji. But nowadays, they don't get public holidays at Indian festivals like Holi.
Right.
Can you tell me what are the reasons behind such behavior towards the Indian diaspora by the
Yeah,
government?
it is very much associated with the ethnic politics which started after the coup culture in Fiji. Actually, the Fiji is always in peril. I mean, recently they they do some reconciliation ceremony after the coup, and they are trying to restore the democracy. It's they are not getting on Holi particularly. You know why? Because if you look to the coup culture of Fiji, in that culture, the Muslim segment of the Indian diaspora, they always supported the coup government, and the Hindu population were always opposed to that coup government. So there are three fractions in the Fiji, and among Indians there are two fractions. One is Hindu, and other is Muslim, right? And of course there is indigenous Fijians, the third fraction. So if you look to the politics around these three components, the Fiji Indians, the Fiji Indians are divided in two. So the Hindu were, outside of all these, the Muslims and the indigenous population are entitled to each other. Even in the coup and even in the government formed by the coup, like Bani Marama government, you will find that the most of the Indian Fiji Muslim Indians, they participated as the ministers and they were part of the government, but the Hindus were secluded from that. So I believe that it was purely based on the politics which was going on and which have been going on in Fiji. Fiji, yeah. So it's all kind of the the current politics or the post decolonization politics of controlling the country or forming the government, or who is indigenous, whose Fiji is. So that's why see, in Mauritius we have all these holidays for the all Indian celebrations. Wherever there is no any ethnic politics, you will find the holidays are there. But wherever you will find the ethnic politics, it took a violent turn, and it has been lots of political and religious repercussions as well. And that is the basic reason. I believe maybe there would be some other reason.
Thank you very much, Professor Ashutosh. At this point, I bring our session to an end. We are very much on time. And I want to thank all of you, especially those of you who took the time to join us here physically and
Yes, I have a
online,
question.
of course. And to remind you that on November 18th, Monday, we have the next lecture, which will be delivered by His Excellency Dr. Roger Gopal, who is based here in Delhi. He's the High Commissioner of Trinidad and Tobago to India, and he's not just an ambassador, but a scholar. His talk is going to be on international relations strategy rooted in ancient Sanskrit literature. So I welcome you all to join us then for that, what we expect to be a wonderful lecture. So thank you all very much. Please get home safely. Namaste to all.
Thank you. Thank you, Indrani ji. Bye bye. Take care.